blood of our people are your lands kept safe.
I see in your eyes the same fear that will take the heart of me.
So do all who live to see such times.
By all that you hold dear, this good earth.
There's some good in this world, and it's worth fighting.
Welcome back, everyone. We're just doing a quick discussion. We are halfway through the first season of The Rings of Power. So I thought this would be a good time to sort of take it all in and kind of get our initial thoughts. I mean, we've already seen the first 4 episodes and we've talked about them. But at this point, we now kind of have a feel for how this show is going to go, at least the rest of season 1. Obviously, we're going to probably get some big climactic reveals or battles or whatnot, but as far as how this style of the show goes, we pretty much understand it now. So yeah, I just want to open the floor up and kind of see what we think of it. I personally, this is right now my favorite show that I'm watching. This is the only...
Really? There's some new Love Is Blind episodes that Kevin is sure.
This is the only show that I actually look forward to each week. So I've got a number of shows on the go that I watch from time to time. They're okay. None of them really drive me. This one drives me, although it's got problems. And yes, I know there's a new Game of Thrones show out there. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but we're not talking about that show. We're talking about this show. So for starters, I think this is the best looking fantasy show of all time so far, right? Like this, the production value of this show is... I don't think it could be better right now.
I want to actually say some of the internal shots. I think Game of Thrones. Well, it is a different setting. Like Game of Thrones seems more medieval. This is
true high fantasy, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like some of the Game of Thrones stuff, especially like inside structures, it feels
more real.
It feels more real.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that too, and I do think I agree with you, but at the same time, I know that. So let me just say, inside the castles of Game of Thrones, they might feel better than maybe the castles we've been in here. I don't think I've seen a better town, a medieval town, than we see here. Like that town looks old. Like it feels old. So like when they're in that tavern, like if you look at the Game of Thrones taverns, they're way too modern. Like they're too they're too big for who owns it. Whereas you look at this town and this tavern, one floor with barely any rooms, with one gigantic open communal room.
It is just kind of open concept.
Yeah, which is more true to medieval period. Now, I do like some of the castle looks of Game of Thrones for sure, but I think in terms of like this is going for high fantasy. How do you? I think it's hard to make internal castle shots stylistically different, like when you're trying to be like dwarf culture versus elf versus Numenor. Yeah. So I will agree with you that there's a realism to Game of Thrones that Game of Thrones nails it when it's in the castles, but it's outside of the castles where I think Game of Thrones starts getting a little too ahead of its time, where like people seem to just have these epic houses that somehow feel a little bit more like modern houses than they should. Whereas here, like even Bronwyn's house, right? Like you see like that kitchen, there's no sink, there's no nothing. It's just a slab counter. It's just an open concept house. Like that's pretty good. I think the costumes here are, so I guess also production wise, the costumes and the visuals. So practical effects is, I'm so glad they went practical for a lot of these orcs. Obviously the wargs can't be practical because there's no such thing as a warg, but I think the wargs look good. Like I do. I know some people have a problem.
They look kind of like the ones from the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
They do.
to me.
They have a
Yeah.
little bit more facial features, and I think people are kind of freaked out by it because it kind of looks a little bit more like an actual wolf or something like that, instead of like the wargs in Peter Jackson's. Their snouts were almost dragon shaped, so I guess it was a little easier to just say, oh, they're a fantasy creature. Whereas these wargs kind of look like real wolves, and people are kind of not happy about that. I like it. I personally think it's neat. But in terms of like the orc costumes go, I love that. And I do think once I saw it, I did think the costume designs for a lot of the other characters that I had been worried about, I think they do work for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's production value. I mean, this is the most expensive show, so it had to be good. Like it had to look good. If it didn't look good, I don't think anyone would watch, because if you can't see it, like, I don't know. I don't think people would want to watch Lord of the Rings without being able to see the stuff visually. But that aside, the storyline or the structure of these episodes, it is clearly bigger than the current House of the Dragon show, because House of the Dragon's really just following 3 characters, maybe 4 if you count Alicent. This is following a ton of characters, and we're jumping all over the place here, from Numenor to some Southland town, up to the dwarves and the elves. Like we jump quite a ways all over the place. So in that style, I'm not sure if you have a preference or not. I don't even know if it matters, but what are your thoughts on just having all these storylines that are kind of going off on their own? They have not really intersected at all yet.
Yeah, it's difficult to do, but they're doing it fine.
Mhm.
So
And Game of Thrones, the first Game of Thrones, the earlier seasons, they did a good job of this.
yeah,
Especially once Ned is, so obviously Ned kind of feels like the main character in the first season, but once Ned is dead, it really does take off. You've got Robb Stark trying to rally his men to fight. You've got Tyrion trying to handle the King's Landing crowd, as well as fighting his own battle against Stannis, who's got his own thing going on. So there's so many things. You got Arya running around, Jon Snow. Like, there's so many storylines, and they do a great job. And I think this show has really picked up on how to do that well. That being said, they have now done this twice in a row where they leave out a certain chunk of story. So
yes. So like last week, or episode 3, I really did miss not seeing the dwarf stuff.
Yeah.
But this week, yeah, I was okay not seeing the Harfoots.
Yeah. Now, I did really miss the dwarf stuff as well. I will also say they kind of did it. They could have done. Okay, how do I want to phrase this? What they could have done is had some of this dwarf stuff happen last week, episode 3, and then have the conclusion to that happen this week, giving more time for that stuff to play out. This is something we've talked about before, but because there's such a vast distance between some of these places, when you jump from one back and forth, you don't get a true understanding of how long time has passed. Because essentially we see Arondir being told to, he's got a choice to make. We then cut to Elrond saying he's going to go visit his friend again. He's telling the Celebrimbor. Then we cut to Galadriel. Then when we come back to Elrond, he's already back with the dwarves. So what could have been a multi-episode plot outline of this one episode, and that would have given the time dilation to really allow you to figure out, Elrond has to travel all the way back to the dwarves. Because they've put all of the dwarf stuff this episode, there is kind of that. There's just a weirdness to it of jumping around that I do worry if it gets out of hand, because I can see it getting to be a point where Elrond essentially is jumping back and forth between the dwarves, Celebrimbor, Gil-galad, and there needs to be more time in between for him to travel and talk with people.
Right.
So that's my one worry with the structure that they've fallen into with the last 2 episodes. I really think they came out strong with the first 2. Like the first 2 had enough of everyone. Obviously, we didn't have the dwarves in the first one, but once the dwarves got going, I was like, okay, this is the style we need. But now it's kind of like each episode we might be missing an entire storyline.
Yeah.
That's
so
what
I
I'm
think,
worried.
like we're getting Harfoots for episode 5.
For sure, Harfoots are going to be the main part of episode 5.
So maybe we won't see like that whole Numenor thing might just get dropped next week.
That's because are we gonna? I don't think we're gonna follow Halbrand. Maybe we do. I don't think we do though. I think we leave him and we go with Galadriel, but she's on a ship to Middle Earth, so that unless that ship encounters some issue, we're just gonna skip that whole session because we're just gonna assume she's sailing to Middle Earth. So I do think we're gonna potentially run into problems down the road. Right now, it's okay.
I mean, we've only had it's only happened once so far that we skipped. Okay, well, except besides the Harfoots this week, but episode 3 we missed the dwarves, and then for episode 4 there was almost like a bit of a time jump.
Yes.
So that's what I'm thinking. We skipped the Harfoots this week. Episode 5, there's going to be a time jump for the Harfoots.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
That's what I think will happen.
Well, and that's the other thing. This is a problem I have with the Game of Thrones show right now. I don't like the time jumps. So
yeah.
you can do it for a few weeks, maybe a month. Game of Thrones is doing it for years, and I don't like it. Whereas here, if they can keep the time jumps to be within a few days of each other, or maybe a few weeks, I will be okay. But it's not my favorite way to go about from episode to episode, especially when some of them are not time jumps. We literally come back to Arondir as he is, like, we literally get the same shot of Adar coming towards him. Like, that's the same. There's been 0 time has passed from one to the.
Yeah.
So some places are time jumping, some storylines are going directly.
But the only reason the dwarves time jumped is because there would have been stuff happening to them in episode 3 that we just didn't see.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it works there.
But I think I would just prefer to see a little bit of them in every episode than to lose them for a full episode. That's just me. Okay, so in terms of the plot, we know there's a lot of lore-breaking stuff. I don't know the extent of it because I'm not a scholar of Tolkien by any means. I've read the trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, which is not a trilogy of books, but I just like to call it the trilogy so people know. I've read The Hobbit, and I've read bits and pieces from other works. I have Silmarillion on my bookshelf, and I've got a few of the other ones. I even have his King Arthur and Beowulf. So it's not like I don't know Tolkien's writing, but I know some of this stuff is not Tolkien.
Yeah.
That being said, I think there is an enjoyable fantasy story here.
Yes, there is. And I think we're gonna have to accept that this is an adaptation. It's not lore, and it's essentially it's gonna be Amazon's version.
Yes.
It's sort of fan fiction-y, but it's a little more than fan fiction because but it is separate from the books. It's gonna be completely separate. This is a separate canon. So
that's right. It's almost like not an introduction to Lord of the Rings, but it's like a here's an easier to digest story set in what is essentially Middle Earth, but is still sort of different, and it just allows people to get into the world without being bogged down by the nitty-gritty details of the Tolkien lore.
Right, and it helps me actually because I'm just give me some visuals of who people are.
Mm-hmm.
Like I I've seen Gil-galad and look at what he did.
That's right. Yeah. So for people like us, now we might be a rare breed, but for people like us, this does not hurt my enjoyment. I was worried that it might, but it does not hurt my enjoyment of Peter Jackson's trilogies. It doesn't hurt my enjoyment of the books. I just take this for what it is. It is a fun fantasy story set in Amazon's version of Middle-earth that has characters that are named after Tolkien characters, but this is not what Tolkien wrote. So this is just a fun fan fiction, if you want to call it that. I just call it just a story. I mean, Tolkien was essentially just writing stories, and he kept changing his mind too on stuff. So I just kind of take it as a fun story set in a world that is very well built up by Tolkien in his writings. And if you want to go and read that, that's awesome. But if not, you can enjoy this with or without them. And I think that's helpful, because if you just write a story that only people who've read the Silmarillion can enjoy, that's not enough people. Like, you're not going to get the kind of production value offered there, because there's just not enough viewers. Like, I would watch it because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan in general, but I just don't think you would have the draw of the general masses if it was so, deep into the lore that you almost had to go and read the books to know what's going on.
Yeah, it wouldn't be very accessible.
No, it wouldn't. And so it's a tough balance to make. I honestly don't know the best way to do this. I know a bunch of fandoms are struggling right now. You've got Star Wars fans that are freaking out about their stuff. The Harry Potter fans don't like their Harry Potter stuff that's come out. And now we got Lord of the Rings fans that are frustrated with this show. And I know people want everything to be the way it was during the first iteration of whatever project it is. But the problem is, it can't be like that. They can't just remake the same stuff over and over again. So they're going to have to take some chances and make some new stories. And I think they've done a decent job at creating a compelling story here. There are problems with it, which I will get to, but for the most part, I think they have captured a lot of the fun that I felt watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. I think they've captured some fun elements there, some good characters here. There's definitely problems, but for the most part, I do think it's enjoyable. But I will say, casual fans that I've been talking to do prefer for whatever reason, they do prefer the Game of Thrones right now to this. I don't quite know why, to be honest. I don't. And I'm invested in both. In fact, I'm a more avid book reader of Game of Thrones than I am of Tolkien. Like, I have read the Game of Thrones books multiple times over the last 10 years when I first got into them. And so I now know, like, nitty-gritty details of the Game of Thrones world in the book form that I don't know about Lord of the Rings. And yet I still prefer this show. I think this show is better. But I will say that there's something holding people back, and I'm not quite sure what it is. And I do think it has to do with the plot just being maybe a little too broad fantasy, if that makes sense. Which I think you and I love. You and I think, are really okay with just kind of a fun fantasy story that evokes those feelings. But for a lot of people, they need more than that. They need something that really draws them in to a character, and I don't think we have a character yet that has that draw power. Yeah, okay, so I guess the last point I want to make, the dialogue. I personally think this is the show's weakest area. To me, I think this is the only difference that is noticeable between the dialogue of Game of Thrones, like the House of the Dragon, and this show. I think the Game of Thrones has better dialogue. This show has some dialogue that feels like a young writer writing fantasy for the first time and throwing in Shakespearean language randomly to make it old-fashioned when it doesn't fit, and has characters speaking in strange ways with strange, like, just random world building things, but it doesn't actually build the world. One example of this is the Harfoot's toe cream. Like, that's supposed to world build, but it really doesn't, because it actually just makes me question, like, what do you mean Harfoot toe cream? Like, what are you talking about? Like, explain what the heck is fireweed, first of all, and why do Harfoots need toe cream? Why not just build shoes? Like, what's going on? If they need toe cream, then they have, like, toe fungus. Like, is this a problem for Harfoot? Like, you know what I mean? So it just makes me question, like, what's going on.
Yeah, you put fireweed in her toe cream.
Whereas when George R. R. Martin world builds, he uses what Tolkien uses, which is stories being told by in-world characters about previous characters in-world. And that way, it's you are learning traditions as if you're in the world, and you get immersed. And we don't get enough of that in this. You get a lot more of it in the Game of Thrones show right now, when you've got Viserys constantly talking about his ancestors and this dagger and passing down this duty to save the realm. I mean, I don't even like that plot line in Game of Thrones, and yet it's better world building than what we're getting here. Here, the only world building we're getting is visual, which I love visual, but you need these characters to be helping us get immersed into the world. Like Peter Jackson has Aragorn just randomly, like, talk about some old elvish folk heroes and folk tales, like to the hobbits, and it helps world build there. The hobbits mention second breakfast in a random joke. That world builds. I know more about hobbits from that joke than I know about Harfoots from, like, a scene where they're honoring their dead people. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's so much more. There's a strategy to how you throw in these jokes or these random bits of their cultural identity, and I just feel like this show throws it in there just as a throwaway lines and doesn't think about them, whereas Peter Jackson, Tolkien, and George R. R. Martin are thinking about the ramifications of what this joke or what this random story that a character will tell, what it means for the overall history of this fantasy world. And so that's my current problem with this show, and it's frustrating because I think if they had just allowed Peter Jackson to stay on to read the scripts, and all he did was cross out random bits of dialogue that were kind of dumb, I think this show is just it's immediately gold to a lot of people. And so it's unfortunate that they ghosted Peter Jackson in that way, and it's also unfortunate that they didn't bring on other Tolkien scholars who, now there may have been some bad blood there where they were clearly not going to follow the lore like they said they were, but what we need is for people to not just nitpick lore stuff, and I've said this in multiple videos. We can't just sit here and yell, that's not lore, this show sucks. The show can still be really good without the lore. The problem is when they have scenes that are bad, it can't just be because that's not lore. Is it bad acting? Is it bad dialogue? Does it look bad? Like you said, you like the look of the castles in the Game of Thrones better. If you're looking at these castles and you don't like them, that's at least a reason. I would disagree. I actually think the sets here, even if they're not as good as Game of Thrones at times, I think they still look pretty good. So I'm okay with every single setting we've seen, other than the raft. I think you and I both had a problem with the raft, and that's that's just us being silly. But other than the raft, every single set piece I think has looked great. And I didn't even have a problem with the orcs digging in a straight line, which some people pointed out. So the orcs had that tunnel, and they were looking for a dagger or a sword, and they dug in a straight line down this gigantic they clear cut trees through a forest and dug in a straight line instead of excavating in like concentric circles around a starting point. So I didn't have a problem with that because they're orcs. I think they're dumb. So like they're gonna be dumb, and maybe they had an idea of where the dagger was and they were just trying to get there. Like, it doesn't matter, but the point is I liked all the set pieces. So if it's not the set pieces, and it's for me it's not the fact that it's breaking lore, there is something holding the show back, and I can't help but think it is dialogue. And I know you and I have been picking these out, but like there are times where they're callbacks to Peter Jackson's, or even if they're Tolkien's words, they just straight up don't work. They don't evoke the same feeling, and so they come across as cheap and almost joke, like it's a joke. Like if you and I sometimes are like joking and, if we wrote a Lord of the Rings show, we would have a bunch of hobbits running around yelling, second breakfast, second, you know what? Like that's just stupid. Like no one wants to watch that because it's clearly a joke. Like you're clearly making fun of it in that moment. When, like I just pointed out, I think the second breakfast line adds a lot of needed background to Hobbit culture that you don't get because you kind of see them on a weird situation. It's a big party. Gandalf is here, and so you don't get the true just hobbits living their life as much as I think it's needed. And so these little moments when Sam is talking about potatoes, when they're talking about second breakfast, they could be jokes. I mean, they're a silly, fun scene, but they add so much deeper knowledge to previous scenes that I think it's brilliant writing, and there's nothing like that here. There's not a single line of dialogue other than Elrond and Durin the Fourth. Other than their scenes when Elrond is realizing what's going on, why is Durin mad at me? Other than that, I can't think of any scenes that really add to the flavor of the world, like the background to anything that I don't already know. And I think that's why people just aren't, feeling that drive to keep watching it. Whereas Game of Thrones clearly has that going for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's as negative as I probably want to get on this. Like there are times where I'm kind of rolling my eyes at some of the dialogue, and to me, that is a problem. I don't roll my eyes once watching the original trilogy. I roll my eyes a couple times in The Hobbit, but Peter Jackson had a really bad situation making that film, so I kind of give it a bit of a pass, I guess. There's no reason for it. They've had multiple years to plan this out. They've had multiple people come and go from Shipton, who was their original lore master, I guess. They've been working with the Tolkien estate. They initially reached out to Peter Jackson. They have had no lack of opportunity to get this right. And there are times where the dialogue just it sounds like a weird production of like Shakespeare at times, where it's just you're just using words like that to make us know that it's medieval language, and it does nothing. It does nothing for the scene. In fact, there are times when the hobbits are talking, or it takes away from it, because like the hobbits are saying stuff that just seem too wordy and weird for hobbits to talk. Like they would much rather just kind of say stuff very simply.
I don't. You get into situations. How can you replicate someone like Tolkien?
Yeah,
I don't know if it's possible.
I don't know if it is either.
But you know what Peter Jackson kind of did, because there's stuff he inserted that was amazing.
Yeah.
Not from the books.
And same as I know people are gonna hate this, and maybe I'll cut this, but Dave and Dan from Game of Thrones, I know we all hate them. I hate them too. I signed the petition. I want a new season 8. But the thing is, they actually wrote some scenes that are not in the books. Like the red wedding is not in the books. It happens, but the scene doesn't take place. We just see the aftermath of it from the point of view of Arya. We know what happens later because Tywin then explains what happened, because he gets a letter from the Freys. But we never actually see the scene where Robb has to apologize for what he's done and how the whole scene takes place. We know the Reigns of Castamere plays, but we don't know how it happens. The way that they wrote that scene was brilliant. And
yeah, it is a good scene. Yeah.
I was shocked when it was not in the books, because I read the books after the show, and now I've read them three times because I'm gearing up for the next book that's coming out. But they wrote that scene, and it felt like it belonged in the books, and it's not in the books. So they were able to capture it. Peter Jackson for sure able to capture it, and he does it in a really smart way. He includes dialogue that he wasn't able to put into a scene somewhere that happened earlier. He includes it later on in a scene that has a similar feel to it. And the perfect example of this is Treebeard. A lot of lines of I guess not a lot, but many lines of Treebeard are from Tom Bombadil and among others. And so he's able to include these lines there in a very similar themed scene, and it works. And people pick up on it, but they don't hate it. And that's the problem we're seeing here is the lines of dialogue that they sometimes include where they're trying to evoke a similar reaction. It's for a moment that it's not needed, and it makes it come off as pandering. Like, by the calluses on my hand. Like, you can't do that. I'm sorry. You just simply can't do that.
I thought "They Are Coming" was too on the nose too.
They
And
Are Coming.
The Regent line. I demand to speak so in authority. Regent was a little too much for me too.
So
because I mean it works with Gandalf because he's like Denethor deserves that disdain.
And Gandalf has authority as well.
Yeah.
I agree.
But with Muriel, it's like, why are you being such a bitch to her?
Yeah, so this is where it gets to like Galadriel. Is she a poorly written character? Is she a Mary Sue? I don't even want to get into that because honestly, we haven't seen enough other than her fighting one troll to say she's a Mary Sue. But
I mean, we know she's thousands of years old.
Yeah.
She's an elf. She's had a lot of training.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to do this? Yeah. She's not a Mary Sue. I don't think she is. I think.
I mean, the idea of her being able to have these skills doesn't. It's not like Rey Skywalker. Or
no, exactly.
Because that's straight up. She just suddenly has all these abilities out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But this one, it's not out of nowhere. She has a huge backstory that we've never seen, that we haven't seen anyway.
That's right.
And she's developed these skills. So
that's right.
It makes sense that she has these abilities.
Yeah. Now people are saying, well, how did she take on a troll by herself? What I will say is, and I think even we question that, but she also has this drive for vengeance, something that nobody else in the Fellowship had. Nobody was training to murder orcs and trolls like their whole life. You know what I mean? Like, she has been on this quest to murder orcs and trolls for thousands of years. So, you know, she's going to develop these skills to a point where she is as long as she survives, she's going to keep getting better at killing these things. She's not going to be very smart, which we see, but I do think she would be able to take on enemies pretty effectively. Whereas, you know, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, sure, they've been in some battles, but they're not dedicating their lives to killing orcs. Like, they are doing other things. So I do think it's okay to have her maybe upstage some people. I don't think she's a Mary Sue. I think when you have elves, like you said, who have been around for so long, you can easily explain it away with they develop these skills over hundreds, thousands of years. And I don't think she's a Mary Sue also because she's not good at everything. She's actually bad at most things. She's only good at fighting. She is a bad friend. She's bad politically. She's a bad sailor. She bad planner. She's gonna jump off the ship and swim back to Middle Earth. Are you kidding me? Like, she's just dumb. You can't be you can be a Mary Sue and be dumb, but she's dumb and it doesn't go well for her. Like, everything she tries to do is bad. She tried to lead a group of elves to go find Sauron. She went the wrong way and got mutinied. That's not a Mary Sue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think she's a fine character if you really want to try and turn this character around. Like, that's great, but they made her really unlikable, and it's gonna be tough to swing her around, because with a lot of other characters, when you discover something from their past that drove them to this, you gain some empathy for them, some sympathy. But here we know her past. Her brother was killed, and now she's out for blood. I don't see how anything else from her past is going to be able to help us reframe that mindset of hers. Like, she's straight up out for vengeance. So the only way to redeem her, in my mind, is for her to essentially repent, or like understand she was wrong. She's going to have to admit it to herself and change her ways. And that's going to go against Nerdrotics and everyone else's criticism, because essentially they think that the writers are writing this character to please people, please women. But I don't think people like this character. I think this character is written to be unlikable, and they're going to try and bring her around.
Yeah. But I think the argument would be, so even when she's wrong, if she's a Mary Sue, this is what it's gonna be, though. Even if she's wrong, it's gonna be, well, she was still right all along.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that at the end, but see, I don't think it can. I mean, obviously these writers have problems, so maybe they will frame it that way. But already, I don't think it can go down that way. We already know Gil-galad agrees with her. He just doesn't like her. So it's not even like she was right, he was wrong. He just doesn't want her doing it, because she brought Halbrand to Numenor. She was wrong all along. She almost died. She should have died. If she doesn't meet Halbrand, and then she finds those people on the raft, and then she ties herself to the raft, she dies. Okay, so she's straight up. She was saved. Whatever Halbrand turns out to be, she was saved by Halbrand, and nothing can take that away from the story. So to say that she was always right, and like everything she did was to help save the day, we know that that's not true. She's already almost died, and she got mutinied, which it turns out the mutiny actually prevented her from going in the wrong direction. If she had kept going north and never
they wouldn't have found anything.
They would have found nothing, and she would have died out there. So already, she's avoided death twice by accident. I already think that more than makes up for any time she might end up being right. You know what I mean? Like, she's already shown to be a flawed character. I'm okay with that. Like Boromir, for example. Boromir says, "Let's take the ring." Now, if that had turned out to be right, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he has this idea, other people disagree. I think Boromir's plan was sound, but
that's a thing where I feel like the Jackson movies didn't explain it well enough.
Oh, about why he was wrong to take the ring?
No, about like why taking the ring could potentially work.
Oh,
because because you watch the films, all you think the ring does is make you go invisible.
That's right.
Boromir, what is going invisible gonna do to help us defeat Sauron?
But I will say this. You're right. I think Peter Jackson, I think he layers in some hints. You're right. I think you have to read between the lines, but he does have
because if Gandalf had taken the ring, he actually could have. There's probably could have beaten Sauron.
That's right. But Gandalf was worried that he would then become essentially the new Sauron and be even harder to defeat.
And Galadriel could have probably defeated Sauron if she took the ring too.
That's right. So for me, I think there's hints.
But they also don't get into like Sauron feared Aragorn taking the ring for himself. He feared Gandalf taking the ring for himself. Right. He feared Galadriel taking, but it didn't even occur to him. Didn't even occur to him that they would try to destroy it. And actually, the Bakshi cartoon goes into that a little bit, because Gandalf, when they're in Rivendell and they decide that the ring needs to be destroyed, it's actually a discussion of like that is the last thing he would expect, and they don't do that in the Jackson movie.
Yeah, so that I will 100% agree with you on that. That we get at least hints that Gandalf and Galadriel would be really powerful with the ring. We don't know what it does for each individual person, but we know that there's a reason Gandalf is afraid to even touch it, and I think that helps people, even if they don't fully understand. That helps them realize it's not just invisibility, but that is what it seems like, because all we see is Frodo and Bilbo using it, and that's all it does for them.
Yeah.
In terms of Sauron,
But it did make like Sam. I think you can attribute Sam's success in the tower fighting those orcs. Part of that came from the ring.
yes, yeah, because Sam didn't train the same way Merry and Pippin did. Merry and Pippin were training for battle, with Boromir, but then they also train on their own when one is with the Rohirrim and one is in Gondor. So they're like training a little bit to fight. Sam doesn't really go through the same training. He's really more like Frodo's assistant or helper, because Frodo is struggling to even just like walk around. So like Sam's like carrying his pack and all this stuff. So you're right. Sam then becomes Sam injures or kills Shelob. I think he just injures, but you can think maybe Shelob dies through the movies. Either way, Sam stabs this giant spider, which has never been stabbed before, and then he kills a handful of orcs by himself. I think you're right. I think there's something there that the ring is giving him a little bit more, because Sam isn't just carrying the ring to destroy it. He's trying to save Frodo, and I think the ring is maybe tapping into that. But getting back to your original point, I 100% agree. It is not clear that Sauron is worried that a whole number of people might take the ring and overthrow him. Even because he doesn't care. Like, obviously we as the audience are like, oh no, if Gandalf takes the ring and overthrows Sauron, then we have evil Gandalf. Audience members, you're like, that's not good. Sauron is like, that's not good, because then I'm not in control. It's Gandalf. So his worry isn't that like, oh no, there'll be an evil Gandalf. It's, oh no, I'll be killed. So he's thinking like, I hope Gandalf doesn't take it. I hope Galadriel doesn't take it. Not because they will make an evil version of themselves. It's because then they'll kill me. So I think that it's not clear enough that he has these worries, because there's a bit of like a, not a lackadaisical approach, but almost like a bring me the halflings instead of like kill Aragorn. You know what I mean? Like, so the orcs come and their job is to take the halflings instead of killing Aragorn or Boromir or Gandalf or whoever. You know what I mean? So like they don't even, like, the orcs aren't really doing what we think Sauron might want them to do, and it's not really established who's giving them orders, because they're not getting the orders directly from Sauron. They're getting the orders through telephone, basically, where Sauron is being able to speak to one member who's tapped into his spirit in the like netherworld or something, and then that person is able to speak his demands down the line. And so we really don't get anything. We just assume, if you're watching this movie for the first time and you know nothing, you just assume that the villain doesn't fear anyone taking the ring. And so when Boromir suggests taking it, the thing is like, oh, Boromir, you're stupid. But like we pointed out in one of our videos, Boromir is right to think that would work, because it would work sometimes.
Yeah.
And to just say he's stupid without explaining the problem, I do think you're right. I think it's a bit of a disservice to the audience there. One maybe nitpick there that we have for the films, but other than that, I think they do hint enough at some of the other aspects that I give it a pass and let the audience members kind of figure it out for themselves or interpret it in their own way. But I do wish there was something where we got, I don't even know how you would do it, but some way to show the fear, because you could just have characters say it, but I think it'd be better to show it somehow. I just don't know how you would. Maybe you can attribute the fact that he sent the riders so quickly to get the ring from Frodo as he was worried that Gandalf might make it back and get the ring. You know what I mean? Maybe that was the worry. But we don't get enough of that. Now, Saruman might have been able to help us there. If Saruman and Gandalf had a bit longer of a conversation where, like, this is after it's revealed, by the way, that Saruman is evil. If we got a bit more of a conversation where Saruman explained this stuff, I think there solves your problem right there. Because Saruman is in touch with Sauron, and we do allow, like, we know Saruman is an intelligent being. Yes, he's been corrupted, but he is still the I guess, quote unquote, at the time, greatest wizard of the five. He is their leader. He would know these things, and so I think we would at least still listen when he say to Gandalf, as Gandalf is lying stranded on the top of the tower, that, you know, Sauron fears one of us taking the ring or something like that, just to kind of explain why he is so eager to be corrupted and get the ring for himself, because that's his goal isn't to give the ring back to Sauron.
Just to have it himself. He could beat Sauron.
He could beat Sauron. So he tells Gandalf, we're going to join Sauron, but secretly he tells his orcs to bring the hobbits to him, not to Sauron or to Sauron's orcs.
It's almost a strange angle. You would almost think maybe he could convince. There's no way you're gonna if your pitch to Gandalf is, let's join Sauron, he's gonna say no. But if the pitch is, give the ring to me, I think I can control it, then we can defeat Sauron, and then I will destroy the ring after.
Yeah.
Maybe Gandalf would be like, oh, well.
You might think about it. Or better yet, so before you tell Gandalf to join you, tell him to bring the hobbits here. And don't be evil yet. Just say, bring the hobbits here. I can protect you guys while we figure out what to do. And so they'll go from Rivendell, they'll go to here.
And then that's when he springs this trap.
Yeah. But I think at this point, I think he thinks Gandalf will turn, because he's turned not easily, but over the years he's turned, and maybe his thought is Gandalf has been so close to this ring for so long that maybe he's corrupted too, or at the very least maybe he also acknowledges that you can't simply beat Sauron without power, and the ring is power, so let's have someone use the ring, and then maybe they will destroy it. Like, I don't think anyone, like Gandalf even says, like, he wouldn't want to be evil, but the ring would tempt him to do stuff that would turn out to be evil, even if in the moment he didn't think that it was. And so I think Saruman thinks, I can do this. I can control this ring, get immense power from it, and save this world. I do believe he's not sitting there trying to be an evil villain. He thinks he can be a savior. And that is why I'm so drawn to Boromir. Boromir has the exact same temptation. This ring can make him be the hero Gondor needs. And that is his only goal. He doesn't want to become the master of the universe and take over evil and become evil. He simply wants to save Gondor. And that's why there's this you can at least feel sympathy towards his character as he struggles with this temptation and eventually succumbs to it. And then you realize, this was the wrong way to go, Boromir. You now have proven that you can't have the ring because how you acted before you even had it. And it's that's why Boromir has such a nice arc. And I do kind of wish we got a little bit more with Saruman. Saruman is an interesting character, and we really get just almost a cartoonish villain from him, for the most part, because we get this essentially like, we must join him, Gandalf, and it's just like, whoa, you're evil. I thought you were the White Wizard. What happened here? Instead of just being instead of tempting Gandalf and trying to sway him, he just comes right out and says it like, we must join him. And you're right. Of course, Gandalf's not gonna go down that road. Gandalf has been Gandalf and Radagast are for sure the least corruptible wizards because they spend so much time with smaller folk.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something to be said about some of the Hobbit ways rubbing off on at least Gandalf, and then some of the more just animal creatures rubbing off on Radagast, who kind of appears almost insane in a way, at least in the Hobbit trilogy. But yeah, that was a little bit of an aside for the Peter Jackson stuff. But it kind of gets to the point that even with some of these flaws, if you call them flaws, in Peter Jackson's work, there's so much more going for it that it can bring it around. If any of these crop up in this show, it can doom an entire episode. And that's the risk they run by not having these characters having purpose yet. You know what I mean? So like Elrond, he's already succeeded. The dwarves are working on the forge. So now he's running around not being shady about Mithril. Like that was his whole, like, what happened this episode? Like really nothing. Like the Mithril storyline means nothing to Elrond, so it means nothing to me because there's no worry for Elrond stealing Mithril. So the dwarves were just being crazy.
Yeah, it was all just suspicion for no reason.
Numenor, what happened there? Not really anything. Like they decided they're gonna go with Galadriel, but like that's it. It took the whole episode to be like, okay, we're gonna join you, because we basically rehashed the same argument that we did when we first came to Numenor, which was Galadriel being really mean, nobody liking the way she acted, but then eventually they decided to help her because, like you pointed out, the tree was still shedding its petals, which was a sign that Numenor was in trouble. And so the queen decided in that moment, I think you're right, in that moment, to shift her decision and say, look, I sent Galadriel away, but that hasn't stopped the tree from showing signs of danger. So we're going to now do the opposite and help Galadriel, because maybe that is what the tree and my visions were warning us all along. Because that's the problem with visions, and that's why I like George R.R. Martin's writing. The problem with visions is sometimes you misinterpret them.
Yes.
And when you see Galadriel come, and then you see a wave wash away Numenor, your mind puts Galadriel as the cause. But what the vision is saying is, unless you get Galadriel and help her, then you'll get washed. Like, you know what I mean? So like that's the risk you run from just going with these visions. But like not a ton happened. Like
no.
And this is the problem. I mean, people joke that the Peter Jackson trilogies are just walking simulators. So much happens. Literally, I would watch an entire extended edition of each scene in those original trilogy because they're so captivating. There's so much going on. And here, there's some scenes where I'm like, there's no point to this. And one in particular that people are really making fun of, and I'm sure you've seen this, the horses. When Galadriel is riding slow motion on horses. That takes forever. It's slow motion horseback riding on a beach. It's brutal. Like, I mean, I'm all for having a stylistic shot now and again. But like, you could have literally just said, we're going to travel by horse to the east of Numenor. And I didn't need the horses. Like, literally, you didn't have to hire horses. You could have just.
Well, they want to show that Galadriel is happy doing something.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't do anything to me because I don't care. Like, okay, great. So she's happy when she has horses, but she's mean to everyone.
It's funny because she's mean right before the horses, then she's happy when she rides the horses. When she gets off the horses, then she's mean again. Yeah,
and she's only happy once she realizes that East Numenor hasn't torn down everything that elves made, and she finds this. He takes her to this library, and there's some elf stuff there, and that's when she's like, "Oh, elf stuff." I'm like, "But you don't even like the elves. You were literally yelling at the king of the elves. You're mad at everyone." Yeah. Oh man, I really hope she meets Harfoot. That's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, her and Sadak having like
That would be a scene. I'd do a whole hour long episode of just them yelling at each other. No, the stars mean this. No, you idiot. Those are elves up there, and they mean this. Oh man. Yeah. So all in all, halfway through, I think, I do think the show has a lot to offer. It's potentially found a bit of a it's gotten a bit too casual right now. Like it's kind of just meandering around. It hasn't really progressed much. Yes, we got Arondir back, but we still don't know who the Adar is. Halbrand still seems sketchy, but at least now we have him on Numenor and Galadriel not on Numenor. So now we get to see him on his own, maybe, if we come back there. So we'll have to see how episode 5 goes. But like this episode, and this is sort of what I hinted at earlier, there's a lot that could have been done in the previous episode with like 1 or 2 scenes that fulfill this entire episode. The only true scenes that were needed and new was Arondir's escape and Bronwyn and her struggles with those people. But everything else kind of seemed either pointless from the Mithril stuff, where like there was never any worry there from either. Like as an audience member, there's nothing intriguing about dwarves finding Mithril, thinking elves are trying to steal it, but us knowing all along the elves are not trying to steal it. So to me, it's kind of a wasted opportunity to have true intrigue. And then the Numenor scene, it's just Galadriel being mean. So again, we've already done that. We've already seen her be mean to people. We did get a little bit of a reveal from Halbrand on how his mind works. But again, these are just a handful of scenes you could have thrown in a previous episode, and you essentially have the exact same setup for episode 5. And that's a bit of a frustration for me.